Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the fascinating neuroscience behind a struggle almost all of us face. Why we hold on to negative feedback so tightly, and exactly how we can deliberately rewire our minds to change that. So, think about this for a second. Why does one tiny criticism stay with us for years, while a dozen glowing compliments seem to disappear by lunch? It's a universally relatable paradox, right? It is so easy to beat ourselves up and view this as a personal weakness, but science tells a completely different story. This isn't a personality flaw, it's hardwired biology. Because as it turns out, your brain is literally built with Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones.
A coaching client recently told me something that will probably sound incredibly familiar. They said, "I know 9 people appreciated my work, but I can't stop thinking about the one person who didn't." If you've ever laid awake at 2 a.m. obsessing over a minor critique, you are definitely not alone. Your brain is actually doing exactly what it was evolved to do.
All right, let's get into Section 1, Teflon and Velcro Brains, and look at the biological default mechanisms operating behind all this psychological frustration.
Neuropsychologist Rick Hansen pioneered a really brilliant concept for this. He explained that our brains are essentially built with Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones. Uncomfortable or threatening experiences are fast-tracked straight into our implicit memory stores. They stick instantly. But positive experiences, they just slide right off like eggs on a nonstick pan, unless they are intensely novel. This is the negativity bias in action.
And the sheer weight of this bias is kind of wild. Research shows it takes about 5 positive interactions to make up for a single negative interaction. Let that sink in. One critical comment from a manager or friend functionally cancels out 5 pieces of praise. And this absolutely applies to our relationships, as well as to our own internal self-talk. So why on earth would our brains develop such an exhausting, disproportionate response to criticism? Let's transition into Section 2, the neuroscience of negativity, to find out.
If we look back at the ancestral era, avoiding threats, what researchers call the sticks of life, was a literal matter of life and death. If an ancestor missed out on a delicious berry, no big deal, they'd find another tomorrow. But if they failed to notice a tiger in the bushes, game over. Today, we don't have tigers hiding in the bushes, but our brain's alarm system hasn't updated its software, so it mistakenly treats a missed deadline or a critical text message exactly like a fatal predator attack.
Now let's look at the hard science. In Section 3, Social Evaluation and fMRI, we'll explore what exactly is happening inside our heads when we are being judged.
Recent studies using functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, have mapped out what scientists call the mentalizing network. This network includes complex regions like the medial prefrontal cortex and the temporal parietal junction. Essentially, this is the hardware that allows us to learn and make inferences about other people's intentions. And what the data shows is that this network dynamically interacts with our affective learning networks to shape our likability ratings and how we respond to praise or criticism.
It gets really fascinating when feedback turns negative. The fMRI data reveals that criticism uniquely alters activation in the medial prefrontal cortex, while simultaneously triggering the amygdala. Now, your amygdala is your emotional threat center. It hyperreacts, driving an automatic fight, flight, or freeze response, prioritizing that stress for deep memory storage. All the while, your prefrontal cortex, your rational thinking center, is just struggling to stay in the driver's seat.
But it's not just the biological wiring, it's the psychological meaning we attach to the feedback. Criticism often sticks so fiercely because it confirms an old story. The critical comment itself isn't necessarily creating the pain from scratch. Well, actually, it's more like it's acting as Velcro attaching to an existing, insecure internal working model. Deep-seated beliefs like, "I'm not good enough," or "I always fall short." The compliment, however, slides off because it has nowhere to attach. Knowing this bias exists is a great first step. But how do we work around it? Let's pivot to Section 4, the cognitive coaching approach, where we move from automatic neurological responses to conscious intervention.
Think of your mind as a set of complex gears. Cognitive coaching leverages these neurological insights to help individuals move beyond surface-level behavioral fixes. Instead, it targets those deep-seated internal narratives and beliefs. When you reshape those internal core beliefs, you're essentially changing the storage system of your mind, giving that sticky, negative Velcro nothing to hold on to.
This brings us to a famous principle in neuroscience. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Because our brains naturally cache negative evidence, we need a conscious, daily practice to balance the scales. By intentionally taking in the good, pausing to truly internalize a positive experience, We can structurally rewire our minds through positive neuroplasticity. These intentional reflective practices rewrite the brain for lasting autonomy and confidence.
So how do we practically apply this? Let's jump into Section 5, Practical Tools for Rewiring, and look at actionable strategies to step out of the amygdala's grip.
First, I want you to remember this number, 90. Neuroanatomist Jill Bolt Taylor discovered that the chemical lifespan of an emotion in the human body is just 90 seconds. If you feel triggered by criticism, that neurochemical surge of fear or anger will peak and begin to naturally subside in a minute and a half. But, of course, that's only if we don't feed it with further reactive thinking and endless rumination.
And that leads us to a highly effective cognitive coaching technique, growth reframing. When feedback arrives, use the 3-second pause. Take a breath, wait 3 seconds, and then reframe. That tiny, deliberate gap is absolute magic. It creates the mental space required to interrupt your automatic evolutionary defense sequence and empowers you to activate that rational prefrontal cortex to process the information thoughtfully.
Once you've paused, you can use the feedback inventory. This is a cognitive sorting system used by confident professionals to actively separate subjective opinions from objective data. When you receive criticism, mentally sort it. Is it actionable, something grounded in data you can improve? Is it perspective, a valid but subjective difference of opinion? Or is it just noise, feedback that says way more about the person giving it than it does about you? This stops you from internalizing someone else's bad day as a flaw in your own character.
And that brings us to the core takeaway of this entire explainer. The goal isn't to somehow stop hearing criticism. The goal is to adopt a growth perspective where feedback stops defining who you are. When your internal narrative changes, eventually, encouragement stops feeling suspicious, success stops feeling like luck, and criticism? It becomes data, not identity. It transforms into an incredible tool for self-awareness.
Your brain's default might be Teflon for the good stuff, but you absolutely have the power to change that. Try intentionally firing and wiring some positive neurons today. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final powerful thought to reflect on. What is one compliment you've dismissed recently that deserves to stay just a little longer?